way to the rendezvous.
Stellar Blade is the newest game from South Korean developer Shift Up, and while it's not their first game, I believe it's their first game that's like not a mobile game. Correct me if I'm wrong. This was a game where I went from being really excited for it to completely forgetting about it, to being cautiously optimistic because of what I've heard about the development, to being excited about it again, and after playing it, not only did it live up to the hype, I think it might have even surpassed it. Let's talk about it. Hi guys, DPX here reviewing today Stellar Blade for PS5. Now before we get started, you know what to do. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell, and leave a comment, or I will cause an apocalypse.
That was close.
The first thing I want to talk about with Stellar Blade is the combat, as it is, no pun intended, stellar. Okay, maybe a little intended. Whether you are fighting enemies or bosses, which I'll get to later, the combat feels challenging at the right level while also feeling rewarding at the right level. And there's also dodging and parrying, of course, like in most games, but the parrying in particular feels so sick when you pull it off, and it's a muscle memory thing. The more you play the game, and therefore the more you parry, the better you get at parrying. And I wasn't really following the trailers that much leading up to release, so I don't know how much was shown before release, so I won't talk about the other abilities and mechanics in this game too much, but I will say that the game does, in fact, introduce more abilities and mechanics later on in the game, some of which get added very late into the game, freshening it up almost 20 hours in, and I really like the abilities. I guess I'll just mention that there's a gun in the game. You unlock a gun. That's not too far into the game, and I'm only mentioning that because a lot of my footage has that. I also don't usually talk about skill trees in games in these reviews, because even though I do use them, to me it's always something that's just sort of there and fun to, you know, upgrade and stuff. But I really liked all the abilities and mechanics in Stellar Blade so much that I actually made some sort of effort to max out the skills in the skill tree. Didn't quite get there, but I got pretty close. Stellar Blade also takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where humans and robot humans coexist. That's kind of an oversimplification, but I mentioned that though because Stellar Blade also has a giant open world, and the post-apocalyptic setting lends itself greatly to the open world. And when you're not in combat, just running around the world feels nice. And that's another thing I like about Stellar Blade. It just feels nice to control. It's so smooth and there's no bullshit where you run out of stamina. It's just a fun game to run around in. Another thing I really liked, and might be the thing I remember the most from Stellar Blade, is the boss fights. Sometimes I fight a boss in a game and it takes me a few tries, and whatever the case may be, I want to blame the game. And sometimes in some games, I'll just say it is the game's fault. But in Stellar Blade, almost every time I died in a boss fight, it felt like I fucked up. It felt like it was my fault and it was something I did wrong. Maybe a few times I got attacked while trying to heal and there wasn't much I could have done, or other times I ran out of ammo when it felt like that shouldn't have happened and it was fucking stupid. But that's the most I'm willing to blame the game on me dying, if you know what I mean. But every boss fight struck the right balance of being difficult but also fair. They aren't challenging because they can kill you in 2 hits immediately, which they can't. They are challenging because you have to strategize and be smart when you fight them. And when you eventually beat a boss, you feel like a fucking beast. Maybe this is just because I'm not the best when it comes to games, you know, not terrible, but I'm not the best. But I want to know what you guys think about the bosses, because I found them challenging but in a way that kept me going, and to me, that's the best kind of challenge. Also, another thing I liked about this game, Eve. That's it. Need I say more? Okay, but all jokes aside, the character of Eve is probably the elephant in the room when it comes to Stellar Blade, as her design has sparked much outrage online, because of course it has. But I'm not here to talk about that. What I am here to talk about though is that while I'll have more to say about the story as a whole later, Eve is probably the most interesting thing about the story. They could have just designed an attractive woman as the main character to sell more copies, and then proceed to make her a bland one-note character, but they didn't do that. They gave Eve layers, and while she certainly isn't the most layered video game character ever, she's definitely more than just a blank slate that happens to be attractive. Maybe it has something to do with the outfits, the outrage I'm talking about. Maybe it has something to do with the outfits, because holy shit, there are a lot of outfits you can collect throughout the game. And I'm a costumes guy, you know what I mean? when it comes to video games. If you get to collect more and more outfits for your character as you play the game, sign me up. I'm also not much of a side quest guy, not that I always ignore them completely, as I do in fact do the side quests in a lot of the games I play, but I don't usually do a whole lot of them. But there are some really cool side quests in Stellar Blade. The music is really cool too. There's a nice mix of music that gets you fired up when fighting enemies, and slow music that calms you down when you are at a rest area. Some of the music reminds me of the music from Bayonetta and Nier Automata, which Stellar Blade has been getting compared to in more ways than one. Lastly, visually, Stellar Blade might be one of the best looking games of the year, maybe even of the generation. Onto the mixed aspects, one thing that isn't really an issue, but it may be confusing, so I'm giving you a little heads up so you know, and that is that there are some side quests that aren't really side quests. What I mean is that there are side quests that you kind of need to do in order to progress through the game. For example, there is a part of the game where you are in like a desert, and there's a rest area, as there are all throughout the game. And you want to go to the rest area because that's where you get to upgrade all your stuff, purchase more items, and restore your health. Normally, you can just go there and rest no problem. But in the desert, the power is out, and you can't use the rest area. So now you need to go and restore the power to the desert so you can use the rest area to heal and rest. Not a bad idea for a side quest, but the thing is the game labels this as like a side mission when, I mean, I guess you could technically keep playing without resting, but you're gonna need to rest. So it's just a little odd that this thing that you have to do, or it's at least very useful to progress through the game, is labeled as a side mission. Again, I'm not really complaining, but it is something weird I wanted to mention. That's why it's in the mixed. And the other mixed thing is the story. It tells an interesting story about a post-apocalyptic futuristic world, but I found myself not really that interested in the events of the story. I mentioned earlier that Eve was the most interesting thing about the story, and there are other interesting stuff. For example, there's kind of a whole mystery thing going on with the main villain, which I found pretty intriguing, but otherwise, the story isn't quite what you came here for.
I have a bad feeling about this.
There's no other way. Stay close to me.
On to the bad, I don't have a whole lot, but there are two things I got. One is, and this only happened to me once, but it was very noticeable, and that was that at one point the game dropped an insane amount of frames. I believe it was during a boss fight too, which made it distracting when trying to fight a boss, and even though it never happened again, or before, it still chugged like crazy for those few seconds. And my other issue is the platforming. I remember once reading a headline, I didn't read the article, but I did read the headline from, I believe it was GameSpot, who said something along the lines of, "The platforming in Stellar Blade is anything but stellar." And I kind of just thought, oh, GameSpot, you're at it again, aren't you? But after playing the game and doing the platforming at times, yeah, it kind of sucked. This game isn't a platformer, so there wasn't too much platforming, but when there was, it was pretty wonky. But that's about it, really. To reuse a pun I made earlier that may or may not have been intended, Stellar Blade is truly a stellar game. Sure, the story is a little bland and the platforming kinda sucks, but that does not at all stop Stellar Blade from being added to Sony's long list of excellent exclusives. The combat, the open world, the boss fights, and much more make Stellar Blade a game that I think is worth playing. And that's why I give Stellar Blade a 9 out of 10. If this is a sign of things to come for Shift Up, they are a developer that I would not sleep on. But that's my review for Stellar Blade. What do you guys think? Do you guys like it, not like it? Have you guys played it, not played it? If you guys haven't played it, do you guys want to get it, not want to get it? Anything about the game, let me know down below. Anyways, be sure to like the video, comment, subscribe, or I will cause an apocalypse.